Marcus thought saving a dying service dog would cost him just his job. He never imagined it would cost someone their life. My beautiful family and friends, welcome back. If you're ready for another unforgettable story, do me a quick favor, hit that like button. Why? Because every like tells YouTube, this story is worth sharing with more people who might really need it today. Drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. I do read every single one, and it makes me feel like we're sitting together in the same room, sharing these moments heart to heart. And don't forget to share this video with someone you love. You never know, the story you share might be the encouragement they've been praying for. This isn't just a channel, it's a family. And when you engage, you're helping us build a safe space where real stories bring real hope. Now, take a deep breath. Get comfortable, and let's dive into today's story. The fluorescent lights of Riverside Diner buzzed like angry wasps overhead as Marcus Williams wiped down table 12 for the third time in 10 minutes. His dark hands moved in practice circles across the worn formica, but his mind wasn't on the smudges or the coffee rings. It was on the elderly white man in the corner booth whose weathered face held the 1,000-yard stare Marcus had learned to recognize, a look that spoke of battles fought in places most people couldn't pronounce. The veteran hadn't touched his coffee in 20 minutes. Instead, he sat hunched over something in his lap, his shoulders shaking with barely contained anguish. Marcus had served enough broken people in this dive to know when someone was hanging by their last thread. "Table 7 needs their check," barked Janet Morrison, the diner's manager, her voice cutting through Marcus's thoughts like a rusty blade. Her pale eyes followed his gaze to the corner booth with undisguised irritation. "And stop gawking at the customers. You're not paid to play therapist." Marcus nodded, swallowing the words that burned in his throat. At 24, he'd learned that speaking truth to power in places like Riverside only earned you enemies. The diner sat on the wrong side of the tracks in a town where the right side didn't much care what happened on the left. Most of the customers were truckers, insomniacs, and people who'd run out of better options, much like Marcus himself. He grabbed the coffee pot and made his rounds, but his attention kept drifting back to the veteran. The man's weather-beaten hands were stroking something beneath the table, and Marcus caught glimpses of golden fur. A service dog, probably old, definitely not supposed to be on the floor of a restaurant, but Marcus wasn't about to be the one to mention it. The bell above the door chimed, and Marcus glanced up to see Dr. Sarah Chin entering with her usual Tuesday night urgency. She was one of the few people who came to Riverside by choice rather than necessity, a veterinarian who worked the late shift at the emergency animal clinic across town. Her black hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and her scrubs were splattered with evidence of whatever crisis had kept her working past midnight. She took her usual stool at the counter, nodding at Marcus with tired eyes that held genuine warmth. In a place where most people looked through him like he was part of the furniture, Sarah's simple acknowledgement meant more than she probably knew. "The usual?" Marcus asked, already reaching for the coffee pot. "Make it a double," she said, rubbing her temples. "Lost one tonight. 14-year-old golden retriever. The owner." She trailed off, shaking her head. "Some days I wonder why I chose this profession." Marcus was pouring her coffee when he heard it, a sound that made his blood turn to ice water in his veins. It was the veteran, and he wasn't crying anymore. He was keening, a low broken sound that spoke of loss so profound it had no words. Every head in the diner turned toward the corner booth. The veteran was on his knees now beside his table, cradling a large golden retriever whose chest barely rose and fell with shallow, labored breathing. The dog's eyes were glazed, and even from across the room, Marcus could see the gray muzzle that spoke of many years and faithful service. "Jesus Christ," Janet muttered, storming across the diner with her face flushed red. "Sir, you cannot have that animal in here. This is a health code violation." The veteran looked up, and Marcus saw something break behind his eyes. "Please," he whispered, his voice cracked with desperation. "She's dying. I can't lose her alone." What would you do if you witnessed someone's final moment with their beloved companion being threatened by cold regulations? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Janet's expression didn't soften an inch. "I don't care if she's dying, she can die outside. This is a restaurant, not an animal hospital." Marcus felt something snap inside his chest. Not break, but snap into place, like puzzle pieces finally finding their proper alignment. He set down the coffee pot and walked across the diner, ignoring Janet's sharp intake of breath behind him. "Sir," Marcus said softly, kneeling beside the veteran. "What's her name?" The old man's eyes focused on Marcus's face with desperate gratitude. "Bella. Her name is Bella. She's been with me for 8 years. Since I came back from—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Marcus reached out slowly, letting Bella sniff his hand before gently stroking her head. Her fur was soft and warm, but he could feel the shallow rhythm of her breathing growing weaker. "She's beautiful. You can see she's been well loved." "Williams." Janet's voice cracked like a whip. "Get away from that animal right now." But Marcus was already looking over at Sarah, who had abandoned her coffee and was watching the scene with professional concern etched across her features. Their eyes met across the diner, and he saw understanding pass between them. "Dr. Chun," Marcus called out, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "Could you take a look?" Sarah was already moving, her medical bag appearing in her hands as if by magic. She knelt beside Marcus and the veteran, her hands moving with gentle efficiency as she examined Bella. Her face grew grave. "How long has she been like this?" she asked the veteran. "Started this afternoon. She just collapsed. I brought her here because I didn't know where else to go. I don't have much money, and the emergency vet—" He looked at Sarah with recognition dawning. "Oh God, are you?" Sarah nodded. "I am. And you're right, she doesn't have long." She looked at the veteran with infinite compassion. "But she's not in pain. Her heart is just tired. Very tired." Janet had reached them now, her face purple with rage. "I don't care if Mother Teresa herself is giving last rites to this mutt. Get it out of my restaurant now, or I'm calling the police." The veteran's face crumpled, and Marcus felt something dark and protective rise in his chest. He stood slowly, placing himself between Janet and the dying dog. "No," he said simply. The word hung in the air like a challenge, and every person in the diner held their breath. Marcus had worked at Riverside for 3 years without so much as raising his voice, but something about this moment, this man, this dog, this callous disregard for basic human decency, had awakened something in him that couldn't be put back to sleep. "Excuse me." Janet's voice was deadly quiet. "I said no." Marcus's voice was steady, but his hands were shaking. "This man served our country. This dog served him. They've earned 10 minutes of dignity." "You're fired," Janet spat. "Clear out your locker and get out. Now." Marcus felt the ground shift beneath his feet, but he didn't move. 3 years of wages gone. His small apartment, probably gone too since he was already 2 months behind on rent. But looking down at the veteran's face, seeing the gratitude shining through his tears, Marcus knew he'd made the only choice he could live with. "That's fine," he said. "But I'm not leaving until she does." What happened next would haunt Marcus for the rest of his life, but not in the way he expected. As Janet turned to storm toward the phone to call the police, her foot caught the edge of the floor mat. She stumbled, her arms windmilling wildly as she tried to regain her balance. Time slowed to a crawl as Marcus watched her fall backwards, her head striking the edge of the metal counter with a sickening crack that echoed through the suddenly silent diner. She hit the ground hard, her body going limp, and a pool of dark blood began to spread beneath her head. The silence stretched for an eternity before chaos erupted. Someone screamed. Sarah was already moving, abandoning Bella to rush to Janet's side. Marcus stood frozen, his mind struggling to process what he'd just witnessed. But in the corner booth, the veteran was still holding his dog, and Bella was still dying, and somehow that felt like the only real thing in a world that had suddenly tilted sideways into nightmare. The paramedics arrived 14 minutes later, but those 14 minutes stretched like hours in Marcus's mind. He knelt beside the veteran, who had finally introduced himself as Thomas Hartley, Staff Sergeant retired, watching Sarah work with quiet efficiency to keep Janet stable while simultaneously monitoring Bella's failing vitals. "She's got a pulse, but it's weak," Sarah murmured, her hands pressed against Janet's neck. Blood stained her scrubs, adding fresh trauma to whatever had kept her working late at the clinic. "Possible skull fracture. We need to get her to County General." Marcus found himself holding Bella's paw while Thomas stroked her graying muzzle. The dog's breathing had become more labored, but her dark eyes remained fixed on her master's face with absolute devotion. In all the chaos, this corner of the diner had become a pocket of strange peace. "You didn't have to do that," Thomas whispered to Marcus, his voice hoarse. "Lose your job for us." Marcus looked down at the old soldier, seeing himself reflected in Thomas's weathered features. Not the skin color or the age, but the bone-deep weariness of someone who'd learned that the world wasn't particularly interested in fairness. "My grandmother used to say that we're all just walking each other home. Sometimes you got to stop and help." "Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman." She was. Marcus's throat tightened. "Raised me after my parents died in a car wreck when I was 7. Worked 3 jobs to keep me in school, made sure I knew right from wrong. She passed 2 years ago, pancreatic cancer. Couldn't afford the good treatments." The admission surprised him. He'd never told anyone at the diner about Grandma Rose, about the medical bills that still haunted his credit score, about the promises he'd made at her bedside that he was still trying to keep. But something about this moment, death hovering at the edges while life stubbornly persisted in the center, made truth feel necessary. Thomas nodded with understanding. "Mine was my wife, Eleanor. Lost her to cancer 3 years back. That's when I got Bella." He smiled through his tears. "Eleanor always said a man needs something to care for, or he stops caring about himself." Sarah looked up from Janet's still form, her dark eyes glistening. "My mom used to tell me the same thing. That's why I became a vet. She said animals love with their whole hearts because they don't know how to do anything else." As if responding to her words, Bella's tail gave the faintest wag, her eyes finding Sarah's face. The veterinarian's professional composure finally cracked, and Marcus saw her wipe away tears with the back of her bloody hand. The paramedics burst through the door with a controlled urgency that seemed to suck all the air out of the room. Marcus automatically stepped back as they surrounded Janet, but Thomas gripped his arm. "Stay," the old man pleaded. "Please. She's almost gone." Marcus glanced at the paramedics loading Janet onto a stretcher. One of them, a young black woman with kind eyes, caught his gaze and nodded toward the corner booth. "You the one who called it in?" "I am," Sarah said, rising from her knees. "Dr. Sarah Chun, veterinary emergency medicine. Head trauma, unconscious for approximately 15 minutes, pulse weak but steady." The paramedic's expression shifted to professional respect. "Any idea how it happened?" Marcus felt every eye in the diner turn toward him. The handful of late-night customers who'd witnessed everything, a trucker named Bill, an insomniac named Mrs. Patterson, two college kids who'd been sharing a plate of fries, all looked at him with expressions ranging from sympathy to curiosity. He realized that his next words could shape how this story was told, could determine whether he became the villain or just another casualty of circumstance. "She was upset about the dog," he said carefully. "Lost her footing on the mat, hit her head on the counter." It was the truth, but not the whole truth. The paramedic nodded and made a note, but Marcus caught the way her eyes lingered on his face, seeing something deeper in his careful phrasing. As they wheeled Janet away, the diner fell into a strange quiet punctuated only by Bella's increasingly labored breathing. Sarah knelt beside the dog again, her hands gentle on the golden fur. "How long?" Thomas asked. "Minutes," Sarah said softly. "Maybe less. Her heart is just tired." Thomas nodded and gathered Bella into his arms, pressing his face against her neck. "You've been such a good girl, Bella. The best girl. Eleanor's waiting for you, okay? She's got a tennis ball and all the bacon you can eat." Marcus felt his own eyes burning. He thought about his grandmother's final moments, how she'd squeezed his hand and told him to be good, to be kind, to remember that every person was fighting battles others couldn't see. She'd made him promise to find work that mattered, to build something meaningful with his life. Working at Riverside hadn't exactly fulfilled that promise, but this moment, bearing witness to love and loss, standing up when it mattered, this felt like something Grandma Rose would have been proud of. "I should call the police," said Bill the trucker, his voice uncertain. "About the accident." Sarah looked up sharply. "It was an accident, right?" Her question was directed at Marcus, but her tone suggested she already knew the answer was more complicated than that. Marcus met her gaze steadily. "She slipped on the mat. I saw it happen." Again, true but incomplete. He'd also seen the rage in Janet's eyes, the way she dismissed Thomas's pain with callous indifference, the moment when basic human decency had demanded he take a stand. But those weren't the kinds of truths that survived police reports and insurance claims. Mrs. Patterson, a thin woman with silver hair who came in every Tuesday for pie and coffee, spoke up from her booth near the window. "That boy did the right thing," she said firmly. "What happened to that woman was unfortunate, but it was an accident. I saw the whole thing." The college kids nodded in agreement, and Marcus felt a strange sense of community settle over the group of unlikely witnesses. They were choosing his version of events, protecting him in small but significant ways. Bella drew in a shuddering breath, held it for a long moment, and then released it with a soft sigh. The silence that followed was profound and sacred. Thomas held her for several more minutes, whispering words too private for anyone else to hear. When he finally looked up, his eyes were red but peaceful. "She's gone." Sarah reached over and gently closed Bella's eyes. She knew she was loved. That's all any of us can hope for. Marcus found himself thinking about legacy, about the things we leave behind when our time runs out. Janet Morrison would be remembered for rules and regulations, for small cruelties delivered with bureaucratic efficiency. But Bella would be remembered for loyalty and love, for 8 years of faithful companionship to a man who'd needed healing. What would people remember about Marcus Williams? Until tonight, probably nothing. He'd been invisible, just another face behind a counter, pouring coffee and clearing tables and keeping his head down. But something had changed in those moments when he'd chosen to stand up, to say no, to put human dignity above personal security. The question was, what happened next? Have you ever had a moment where you had to choose between doing what was safe and doing what was right? What did you choose, and how did it change you? Share your story in the comments. As if reading his thoughts, Sarah stood and faced him directly. What will you do now? It was a simple question with no simple answer. He was unemployed, probably about to be evicted, with no references and a story that would be hard to explain to future employers. But looking around the diner, at Thomas cradling his beloved companion, at the strangers who'd chosen to protect him, at Sarah whose eyes held something that looked suspiciously like admiration, Marcus realized he felt more alive than he had in years. "I don't know," he said honestly. "But I guess we'll find out together." Outside, the first hints of dawn were beginning to lighten the eastern sky, and Marcus Williams was about to discover just how much his life could change in a single night. The police arrived at 6:47 a.m., just as the morning shift was supposed to begin. Marcus watched through the diner's windows as Detective Ray Morrison, a stocky white man with graying temples and the kind of mustache that belonged to a different decade, stepped out of an unmarked sedan. The name hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. Morrison. As in Janet Morrison. "Oh hell," muttered Bill the trucker, who was still nursing his 4th cup of coffee. "That's Janet's husband." Marcus felt the air leave his lungs. Of course. In a town this size, of course the detective would be family. He watched Detective Morrison's face as the man surveyed the scene through the window, the overturned mat, the dried blood on the floor near the counter, the small group of witnesses who'd been too shaken to leave. Sarah, who had been quietly helping Thomas wrap Bella in a clean tablecloth from the diner's supply closet, looked up with concern. "Marcus, you need to call a lawyer." "With what money?" Marcus tried to keep his voice steady, but panic was starting to claw at his chest. "I just lost my job, remember?" The bell chimed as Detective Morrison entered, his eyes immediately finding Marcus behind the counter. There was something predatory in his gaze, something that went beyond professional duty into personal territory. "You must be Marcus Williams," Morrison said, his voice deceptively calm. "I'm Detective Morrison. I understand you were present when my wife had her accident." The emphasis on the word accident made it clear that Morrison had already decided this was something more sinister. Marcus felt the weight of every witness's gaze, the pressure of their collective decision to protect him suddenly feeling more fragile than he'd hoped. "Yes, sir. I saw her slip on the mat near the counter." Morrison's eyes swept the scene methodically, taking in every detail. "Interesting. You know, I've been married to Janet for 15 years. She's not clumsy. Matter of fact, she's got the best balance of anyone I know. Used to do gymnastics in college." Thomas looked up from where he sat with Bella's body, his weathered face showing a flash of the soldier he'd once been. "Son, sometimes people just fall. I've seen strong men trip over their own shadow when their mind's elsewhere. And you are." Morrison's attention shifted to Thomas with barely concealed irritation. "Staff Sergeant Thomas Hartley, retired. I was here with my service dog when your wife decided she didn't like animals in her establishment." The word service hung in the air like a challenge. Morrison's jaw tightened. He couldn't dismiss a veteran's testimony as easily as he could Marcus's. Mrs. Patterson cleared her throat from her booth. "Detective, I saw the whole thing. That young man was just trying to help this gentleman with his dying dog. Your wife got herself worked up and lost her footing. It was a tragedy, but it was an accident." Morrison pulled out a notebook, his movements sharp and deliberate. "Mrs. Patterson, isn't it? I'll need a formal statement from everyone who was present." As he began interviewing the witnesses, Marcus caught Sarah's eye. She was standing near the back of the diner, her medical bag clutched in her hands, and something in her expression made his heart skip. She looked afraid, not for herself, but for him. She approached him while Morrison was questioning the college kids, speaking in a low voice. "Marcus, there's something you need to know. About Janet's injuries." His blood turned to ice water. "What about them?" "The pattern of the bleeding, the impact site. I'm not a forensic expert, but I've seen enough head trauma in animals to recognize the signs." She hesitated, glancing toward Morrison. "Her injuries are consistent with a fall, but they're also consistent with being pushed hard." Marcus felt the world tilt sideways. "Are you saying?" "I'm saying that if someone wanted to make a case that this wasn't an accident, they could. Especially if that someone was motivated by personal reasons rather than professional ones." Before Marcus could respond, Morrison appeared at his elbow. "Mr. Williams, I'll need you to come down to the station for a formal statement." It wasn't a request. Marcus looked around the diner at the faces of people who'd become unlikely allies in the space of a few hours. Thomas gave him a slight nod, the kind of acknowledgement one soldier might give another before a dangerous mission. Mrs. Patterson smiled encouragingly. The college kids looked worried but determined. But it was Sarah's face that held him. There was something there beyond concern, beyond professional interest. Something that looked like the beginnings of trust, maybe even affection. And suddenly Marcus realized he had something to lose beyond just his freedom. "Am I under arrest?" he asked. Morrison's smile was cold. "Not yet. But the morning's still young." As they prepared to leave, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text message. The number was unfamiliar, but the words made his blood freeze. "I saw what really happened at the diner. Meet me at Riverside Park in 1 hour if you want to stay out of prison. Come alone. A friend." Marcus stared at the message, his mind reeling. Someone else had been watching. Someone who claimed to have seen what really happened. But what did that mean? And why would they want to help him? Sarah noticed his expression change. "What is it?" He showed her the message, watching her face pale as she read it. "It could be a trap," she whispered. "Or it could be my only chance," Marcus replied. Detective Morrison was already at the door, his impatience obvious. "Mr. Williams, we don't have all day." Marcus looked at the text message again, then at Sarah's concerned face, then at Thomas, who was still holding his dead dog with infinite tenderness. In the space of 8 hours, he'd lost his job, witnessed a death, become the prime suspect in what might be ruled an assault, and discovered that sometimes doing the right thing comes with a price higher than you ever imagined paying. But he'd also found something unexpected, a community of people willing to stand up for him, a woman whose respect meant more than he'd realized was possible, and a sense of purpose that had been missing from his life for far too long. If you received a mysterious message that could save you but might be a trap, would you take the risk? Sometimes the biggest gambles come with the highest stakes. "What would you do?" "Detective Morrison," Marcus said, his voice steadier than he felt. "I'll come with you to the station. But I want to call a lawyer first." Morrison's smile turned predatory. "That's your right. Though I have to wonder why an innocent man would need a lawyer for a simple statement about an accident." Marcus met his gaze without flinching. "Because in my experience, detective, innocent men are the ones who need lawyers the most." As they walked toward the door, Sarah caught his arm. "Marcus, whatever happens, don't go to that meeting alone. Promise me." He looked into her eyes and saw something that made his heart race despite the circumstances. "I promise." It was a lie, but it was the kind of lie you tell someone you care about to keep them from worrying. As Detective Morrison led him toward the patrol car, Marcus was already planning how to slip away from the station and get to Riverside Park. Because whatever game was being played here, whatever forces had been set in motion by his decision to stand up for dignity and decency, Marcus Williams was about to discover that some choices echo far beyond their initial moment, and some secrets have the power to destroy everything you thought you knew about the truth. The morning sun was climbing higher, painting the small town in deceptively peaceful colors, but Marcus could feel storm clouds gathering on his horizon. And somewhere in the distance, a mysterious ally or enemy was waiting with information that could change everything. The interrogation room at the Riverside Police Department smelled like stale coffee and broken dreams. Marcus sat across from Detective Morrison, whose wedding ring caught the harsh fluorescent light every time he turned a page in his notebook. Between them lay a manila folder that Morrison kept glancing at with satisfaction, as if it contained Marcus's confession already written in his own hand. "Let's go through this again," Morrison said, his voice carrying the patient tone of a man who had all day and a personal vendetta to fuel him. "You claim my wife slipped on a mat. She did slip on a mat. After you confronted her about the dog. After I asked her to show some compassion to a dying veteran and his service animal." Morrison's pen stopped moving. "Service animal? You sure about that? Because according to the health department, there's no record of any service animal registration for a Thomas Hartley at that address." Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. He'd assumed Bella was a registered service dog, the way she'd stayed calm in the diner, the way Thomas had referred to her, the obvious bond between them. But now doubt crept in, and he realized how little he actually knew about Thomas Hartley. "Even if she wasn't registered," Marcus said carefully, "she was clearly important to him." "Important enough for you to lose your job over? Important enough to get physical with my wife?" "I never touched your wife." "But you did threaten her job security, didn't you? Made her feel unsafe in her own workplace." The questions kept coming, each one designed to paint Marcus as an angry black man who'd intimidated a defenseless white woman until she fell and cracked her skull. It was a familiar narrative, one that had destroyed other lives in other interrogation rooms, and Marcus could feel its weight settling around his shoulders like a noose. His phone, which Morrison had graciously allowed him to keep, buzzed with another message. This time the text was shorter, 1 hour. "Don't disappoint me." Morrison noticed the distraction. "Popular guy. Who's texting you?" "My lawyer," Marcus lied smoothly. "Funny. I thought you said you couldn't afford one." Before Marcus could respond, there was a knock on the interrogation room door. A young officer entered with a concerned expression. "Detective, there's a Dr. Chen here to see you. Says she has additional information about the incident." Marcus's heart leaped. Sarah had come to the station. But was she here to help him, or had she reconsidered her earlier support? Morrison sighed with theatrical annoyance. "Send her in." Sarah entered the room with professional confidence, her medical bag in one hand and a manila envelope in the other. She'd changed out of her blood-stained scrubs into clean jeans and a blue sweater that brought out the warmth in her dark eyes. When those eyes met Marcus's, he saw determination there, not betrayal. "Detective Morrison," she said crisply, "I wanted to provide you with my professional assessment of the incident, as well as some additional context that might be relevant to your investigation." Morrison leaned back in his chair, clearly skeptical. "I wasn't aware we'd requested a veterinary consultation on a human injury case." Sarah's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "I also have training in emergency medical response, detective. I was first on scene after the fall, and I treated Mrs. Morrison until the paramedics arrived." She opened the envelope and pulled out several photographs that made Marcus's breath catch. They were pictures of Janet Morrison's injuries, taken at the hospital with clinical precision. "The impact pattern is consistent with an accidental fall," Sarah continued. "The angle of contact, the distribution of the bleeding, the lack of defensive wounds or other trauma indicators, all point to someone who lost their footing and fell backward, striking their head on the counter edge." Morrison's face darkened. "I don't recall asking for your medical opinion, Dr. Chun." "No, but the district attorney might find it relevant. Especially since I'm willing to testify as an expert witness if necessary." Sarah's voice remained calm, but Marcus could hear the steel underneath. "I've already forwarded my preliminary report to the hospital's medical records department." The room fell silent except for the tick of the wall clock. Morrison stared at Sarah with undisguised hostility, but she met his gaze without flinching. Marcus realized he was witnessing something remarkable. This woman was putting her professional reputation on the line for him, risking Morrison's wrath and potentially damaging her standing in the medical community. "There's something else," Sarah added, pulling out another sheet of paper. "I did some research on Thomas Hartley. Turns out he was awarded the Purple Heart in Afghanistan, along with a Bronze Star for valor. His service dog Bella was indeed registered, not through the local health department, but through the VA's service animal program. I have the documentation right here." Marcus felt a surge of relief mixed with admiration. Sarah had spent her morning gathering evidence, building a case to protect him. The growing attraction he'd felt toward her deepened into something more profound: respect, gratitude, and yes, the beginnings of love. Morrison's jaw worked silently for a moment before he spoke. "This doesn't change the fact that Mr. Williams created a confrontational situation that resulted in my wife's injury." "Actually," Sarah said, "it establishes that Mr. Williams was protecting a disabled veteran's legal right to have his service animal present during a medical emergency. I'd say that makes him a hero, not a criminal." The word hero hung in the air between them. Marcus had never thought of himself that way. He'd just done what felt right in the moment. But seeing himself through Sarah's eyes, he began to understand that sometimes heroism isn't about grand gestures or dramatic rescues. Sometimes it's about standing up when it would be easier to stay silent, even when the cost is higher than you imagined. Morrison slammed his notebook shut. "This interview is over. Mr. Williams, don't leave town." As they left the station together, Marcus felt the warm touch of Sarah's hand on his arm. "You okay?" "Thanks to you." He stopped walking and turned to face her fully. "Why did you do that? You could have just walked away." Sarah was quiet for a moment, studying his face in the afternoon sunlight. "My parents came here from Taiwan when I was 5. They worked in a restaurant, saved every penny to put me through school. They taught me that when you see injustice, you don't look away. You stand up, even if you're standing alone." "You weren't standing alone," Marcus said softly. Their eyes met and held, and Marcus felt something shift between them, a recognition of shared values, mutual respect, and a spark of something deeper. But before either could speak, his phone buzzed again. "Time's up. Riverside Park. North entrance. Now, or face the consequences." Sarah saw his expression change. The mysterious message. Marcus nodded reluctantly. He'd promised her he wouldn't go alone, but looking at her face, seeing the concern and growing affection there, he knew he couldn't risk putting her in danger. "I have to go," he said. "Not alone. I'm coming with you." "Sarah, no. We don't know who this person is or what they want." "Exactly why you shouldn't go alone." She crossed her arms with determination that reminded him of his grandmother's stubborn streak. "Besides, I'm curious about what they know that we don't." As they walked toward Riverside Park, Marcus felt the weight of the unknown pressing down on him. Behind them, Detective Morrison was probably planning his next move. Ahead of them, a mysterious ally or enemy waited with information that could save or destroy him. And beside him walked a woman who had already proven she was willing to fight for him. The tension was building towards something explosive, and Marcus could feel the storm clouds gathering. But for the first time since this nightmare began, he wasn't facing it alone. Riverside Park sat on the edge of town like a forgotten promise, its rusted code playground equipment and overgrown walking paths testament to a community that had given up on maintaining hope. Marcus and Sarah approached the north entrance with cautious steps, the afternoon sun filtering through bare oak branches that cast shifting shadows across the cracked pavement. The park was empty except for a figure sitting on a bench near the old gazebo, a small woman with silver hair and a worn coat that Marcus recognized immediately. Mrs. Patterson from the diner, the customer who defended him to Detective Morrison just hours earlier. "Mrs. Patterson?" Sarah said, confusion evident in her voice. "You're the one who sent the messages?" The elderly woman looked up at them with eyes that held decades of secrets. "Hello, dear. And Mr. Williams, thank you for coming. Please, sit down. What I have to tell you is going to change everything you think you know about last night." Marcus exchanged glances with Sarah before settling onto the bench beside Mrs. Patterson. The old woman's hands were shaking, and she clutched a manila envelope against her chest like a shield. "I've been coming to that diner every Tuesday for 8 years, Mrs. Patterson began, her voice trembling with emotion. "Same booth, same time, same pie and coffee. Most folks don't notice old ladies. We become invisible after a certain age. People say things around us, do things, as if we're not even there." She paused, gathering her strength. "Janet Morrison wasn't a good person, Mr. Williams. I know it's wrong to speak ill of someone who's hurt, but the truth needs telling." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. What kind of truth? Mrs. Patterson opened the envelope with careful fingers, pulling out a small digital camera and several printed photographs. "I have arthritis in my hands, makes them shake something fierce. But I've been documenting things for months now. Things Janet did when she thought no one was watching." The first photograph showed Janet behind the diner's counter, but she wasn't alone. Detective Morrison was there in civilian clothes, and they were examining what looked like small plastic bags filled with white powder. Sarah gasped. "Is that?" "Cocaine," Mrs. Patterson confirmed. The diner was a distribution point. Janet would package it during the late shift when the place was mostly empty, and Ray would collect it for his network of dealers. "I've been taking pictures for 3 months, trying to work up the courage to take them to the state police. Marcus stared at the photographs in disbelief. "You're saying Detective Morrison was running drugs through his wife's restaurant?" "More than that." Mrs. Patterson pulled out additional photos showing cash exchanges, meetings with rough-looking men Marcus didn't recognize, and what appeared to be Janet accepting money from various late-night customers who never ordered food. It was a family business. Janet provided the cover. Ray provided the protection. Anyone who got too curious, too observant. She shuddered. Well, they found ways to discredit people, drive them out of town. The pieces began falling into place with sickening clarity. Marcus thought about his 3 years at the diner, how Janet had always seemed to dislike him beyond normal workplace friction, how she'd scheduled him for the quietest shifts, how she discouraged him from being too friendly with customers. She was afraid of me, he realized aloud. Not because I was black, but because I was observant. Because I paid attention to people. Mrs. Patterson nodded. "You have kind eyes, dear. The kind that see things others miss. Janet noticed that about you right away. She'd been pushing to have you fired for months, but the owner liked your work ethic." Sarah was studying the photographs with professional intensity. "Mrs. Patterson, this is incredibly dangerous. If Morrison finds out you have these." "That's why I waited until now," the old woman said. "Janet's accident gave me the perfect opportunity. With her in the hospital and Ray focused on you, I could finally act without them suspecting." Marcus felt the world shifting beneath him, reality reorganizing itself around this new information. "But why help me? You barely know me." Mrs. Patterson's eyes softened. "My grandson was about your age when he died. Leukemia. He was a good boy, like you, always trying to help people, always standing up for what's right. When I saw you defending that veteran and his dog." Her voice broke. "I saw my Tommy in you. I couldn't let them destroy another good person." The emotional weight of her words hit Marcus like a physical blow. This stranger had risked everything to save him, motivated by love for a grandson he'd never met. The scope of human kindness, and human cruelty, was almost too much to process. But Sarah was already thinking ahead. "We need to get these to the state police immediately. This evidence could get us all killed," Mrs. Patterson interrupted quietly. "Ray Morrison has connections throughout the county. Local judges, prosecutors, even some state officials. This network goes deeper than just a small-town drug operation." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. How deep? Mrs. Patterson pulled out one final photograph, and this one made both Marcus and Sarah draw sharp breaths. It showed Detective Morrison shaking hands with a man in an expensive suit outside what appeared to be the county courthouse. Marcus didn't recognize the man, but Sarah clearly did. "That's District Attorney Charles Brennan," she whispered. "I've seen him on the news. The same DA who would prosecute any charges against you," Mrs. Patterson confirmed. "The same DA who's been running for State Attorney General on a law and order platform." The full magnitude of the situation crashed over Marcus like a wave. He wasn't just fighting a grieving husband seeking justice for his wife's accident. He was up against a criminal conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of local government. If they wanted him gone, they had the power to make it happen, evidence or no evidence. Have you ever discovered that a situation was much more complex and dangerous than it first appeared? Sometimes pulling one thread unravels an entire tapestry of corruption. How do you find the courage to keep fighting when the odds seem impossible? Sarah reached for his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. "Marcus, we're going to figure this out. There has to be someone we can trust with this information." Mrs. Patterson shook her head sadly. "I've been thinking about this for months, dear. Every official I could approach is either part of the network or too frightened to act against it. That's why I never came forward before, until you gave me hope." "Me?" Marcus felt overwhelmed by the responsibility she was placing on his shoulders. "You stood up when it mattered, knowing it would cost you. That takes a special kind of courage. If you're willing to fight this, really fight it, I'll stand with you. But I won't lie, it's going to be dangerous. They've already tried to frame you for assault. When they realize you're not going to take a plea deal and disappear quietly." She didn't need to finish the sentence. Marcus understood that his choice in the diner had set forces in motion that couldn't be stopped or redirected. He could run, leave town, change his name, start over somewhere else. Or he could fight a battle that seemed impossible to win against enemies with unlimited resources and political protection. He looked at Sarah, seeing his own determination reflected in her eyes. Then he thought about Thomas Hartley, grieving alone with his dead service dog. About his grandmother, who'd taught him that every person was fighting battles others couldn't see. About all the people who would suffer if this corruption continued unchecked. "What do we do?" he asked. Mrs. Patterson smiled for the first time since they'd sat down. "We do what your grandmother would have done, dear. We find the light in the darkness, and we hold it up for everyone to see." As the three unlikely allies began planning their next move, Marcus realized that his simple act of defending a veteran's dignity had evolved into something much larger, a battle for the soul of their community. And somewhere in the distance, Detective Morrison was probably planning his next move, unaware that his carefully constructed world was about to come crashing down. The stakes had never been higher, but Marcus no longer felt like he was facing them alone. He had Sarah's brilliant mind and fierce loyalty, Mrs. Patterson's evidence and lifetime of wisdom, and a cause worth fighting for. The war was just beginning. By evening, their plan had seemed foolproof. Mrs. Patterson would drive to the state capitol while Marcus and Sarah created a distraction by visiting Janet Morrison at County General Hospital, appearing to show remorse and concern while actually ensuring Detective Morrison was occupied. Meanwhile, Mrs. Patterson would deliver copies of her evidence to the state attorney general's office, bypassing the corrupted local system entirely. It should have worked. It would have worked if Detective Morrison hadn't been 3 steps ahead of them. Marcus realized their mistake the moment he and Sarah walked into the hospital lobby and saw Morrison waiting for them with a smile that could have frozen hell itself. Beside him stood 2 men in expensive suits who had the unmistakable bearing of federal agents, or people who wanted others to think they were federal agents. "Mr. Williams," Morrison said pleasantly. "Dr. Chun. How thoughtful of you to come check on Janet's recovery." Sarah's hand found Marcus's arm, her grip tight with warning. Something was wrong. Very wrong. "We just wanted to make sure she was okay," Marcus said carefully. "And to apologize if there's been any misunderstanding about what happened." Morrison's laugh was hollow. "Oh, there's been a misunderstanding, all right. See, about an hour ago, we intercepted some very interesting photographs. Pictures taken by a confused elderly woman who apparently thinks she witnessed some kind of criminal conspiracy." Marcus felt his blood turn to ice water. They'd found Mrs. Patterson. "I don't know what you're talking about," Sarah said, but her voice betrayed her fear. One of the suited men stepped forward, his smile predatory. "Dr. Chun, I'm Agent Walsh with the DEA. We've been investigating reports of veterinary drug theft in this region. Ketamine, specifically. Used in animal surgeries, but also popular with certain criminal elements. The trap was elegant in its cruelty. Marcus watched Sarah's face pale as she realized what they were implying. Her veterinary clinic, her access to controlled substances, her presence at the diner during a drug-related incident, they were setting her up as the real criminal. "That's ridiculous," Sarah said, but Agent Walsh was already pulling out official-looking paperwork. "We have a warrant to search your clinic and your home, Dr. Chun. We also have testimony from a reliable source that you've been using your position to divert drugs to street dealers." Marcus stepped protectively in front of Sarah. "This is harassment. You're manufacturing evidence because we were about to expose." "Expose what?" Morrison's voice was sharp now, dropping all pretense of civility. "The fevered imaginings of a lonely old woman with dementia? The conspiracy theories of an angry ex-employee with a history of violence?" The second suited man, who Marcus now realized probably wasn't a federal agent at all, handed Morrison a thick manila folder. "Mr. Williams, did you know that your termination from Riverside Diner wasn't your first workplace incident? According to these records, you have a pattern of aggressive behavior toward authority figures." Marcus stared at the folder with growing horror. They were manufacturing an entire false history for him, creating a paper trail that would support whatever narrative they wanted to tell. "Where is Mrs. Patterson?" Sarah demanded. Morrison's expression didn't change. "Poor Eleanor suffered a fall at her home this afternoon. Tragic accident. She's in intensive care, touch and go, according to the doctors. Apparently she was trying to reach something on a high shelf and lost her balance." The words hit Marcus like physical blows. Mrs. Patterson, brave, kind Mrs. Patterson who'd risked everything to help him, was fighting for her life because of choices he'd made. The woman who'd reminded him of his grandmother was lying broken in a hospital bed, another casualty in a war he'd never meant to start. "You bastards," he whispered. Agent Walsh stepped closer, his voice cold. "That sounds like a threat, Mr. Williams." "Agent Rodriguez, did you hear Mr. Williams threaten a police officer?" The other fake agent nodded. "Clearly heard him threaten Detective Morrison. In front of multiple witnesses." Marcus realized with crystalline clarity that they were about to arrest him, not for Janet's accident, but for threatening an officer. Sarah would be charged with drug trafficking. Mrs. Patterson might die from her accident. And the real criminals would walk free, protected by badges and bureaucracy and the kinds of connections that made evidence disappear and witnesses forget what they'd seen. "Marcus," Sarah said urgently, "run." It was the last thing he'd expected her to say. Run. Leave her to face these charges alone. Abandon Mrs. Patterson. Let the corruption win. Everything in him rebelled against the idea. "I'm not leaving you. You have to." Tears were streaming down her face now. "If they arrest both of us, who's going to tell the truth? Who's going to make sure Mrs. Patterson gets justice?" Agent Walsh was already reaching for handcuffs. "Dr. Chun, you're under arrest for conspiracy to distribute controlled substances." Marcus looked around the hospital lobby desperately, seeing security guards moving to block the exits, seeing ordinary people going about their evening routines while his world collapsed. But in the corner of his vision, he caught sight of something that made his heart leap. Thomas Hartley, the veteran from the diner, sitting in a wheelchair near the information desk with Bella's service vest folded in his lap. Their eyes met across the lobby, and Marcus saw recognition flash in the old soldier's face. Thomas had been a witness to everything that started this nightmare. He'd seen Janet's callous cruelty, Marcus's act of defiance, the accident that began this cascade of corruption and violence. Without speaking, Thomas reached into his jacket and pulled out his cell phone, holding it up so Marcus could see he was recording. Recording Morrison's threats, the fake agent's intimidation, the entire scene playing out in full view of hospital security cameras. But even as hope flickered, Marcus realized it might not be enough. Morrison's network was powerful, connected, ruthless. They'd already tried to kill Mrs. Patterson. They wouldn't hesitate to silence Thomas, to make evidence disappear, to destroy anyone who stood in their way. Sarah was being handcuffed now, her eyes never leaving Marcus's face. "Remember your grandmother," she said clearly, loud enough for Thomas's phone to pick up. "Remember what she taught you about fighting for what's right." The words were a message, a promise, a declaration of faith in him even as they were being torn apart. Marcus felt something break inside his chest, not his spirit, but his last illusions about the world being fair or just or kind. Morrison stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper meant only for Marcus. "You should have taken the hint when we fired you, boy. Should have kept your mouth shut and your head down. Now look what you've cost everyone." Marcus looked at Sarah being led away in handcuffs, thought about Mrs. Patterson lying unconscious in intensive care, remembered his grandmother's final words about being good, being kind, being strong enough to help others even when it hurt. And he made the hardest choice of his life. He ran. Not because he was a coward, but because Sarah was right. Someone had to survive to tell the truth. Someone had to remain free to fight back. As he pushed through the hospital's rear exit into the cold night air, Marcus could hear Morrison shouting orders, could hear footsteps pounding behind him. But he also heard Thomas's voice, strong and clear despite his age, calling out to everyone in the lobby, "That man's a hero. He stood up for what's right, and they're trying to destroy him for it." Marcus ran through the darkness, his heart breaking with every step, carrying the weight of everyone who was counting on him to somehow make this right. Behind him, the people he cared about were facing consequences for his choices. Ahead of him lay an uncertain path through a world where truth mattered less than power, where justice was a luxury the powerless couldn't afford. He was alone again, but this time the stakes were life and death, and failure meant more than just his own destruction. It meant letting evil win. In his pocket, his phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number, "Safe House. 1247 Elm Street. Blue door. Trust no one else." Marcus stopped running and stared at the message. Another mysterious ally, another leap of faith required. After everything that had gone wrong, every trap they'd walked into, every person who'd been hurt because of his choices, he had to decide whether to trust again. The alternative was giving up, letting Morrison and his network destroy everyone he cared about while they continued poisoning his community with drugs and corruption. Marcus Williams looked up at the star-filled sky and thought about his grandmother, about Mrs. Patterson's grandson Tommy, about all the good people who'd fought impossible battles because someone had to fight them. Then he started walking toward Elm Street, toward whatever hope or danger waited behind that blue door, carrying with him the desperate faith that somehow, someway, the light could still overcome the darkness. The house at 1247 Elm Street looked abandoned from the outside. Peeling paint, overgrown yard, windows dark as empty eye sockets. Marcus approached the blue door with every nerve on edge, his grandmother's voice echoing in his mind. "Sometimes you have to walk through the valley of shadow to reach the light on the other side." Before he could knock, the door opened silently. A tall black woman in her 50s stood in the doorway, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a neat bun, her dark eyes sharp with intelligence and something that looked like recognition. "Marcus Williams," she said, not a question but a statement. "I've been waiting for you." Marcus hesitated on the threshold. Who are you? Someone who's been fighting Ray Morrison's network a lot longer than you have. My name is Judge Angela Washington, retired federal judge, currently persona non grata in this county. She stepped aside, gesturing him in. Come in quickly. We don't have much time. The interior of the house was a stark contrast to its exterior. State-of-the-art computer equipment lined one wall, legal documents covered every surface, and a large map of the county was pinned to another wall with red pins marking various locations, including Riverside Diner. You're the one who sent the messages, Marcus realized. Judge Washington nodded, settling into a chair behind the largest computer. I've been tracking Morrison's operation for 2 years, ever since they tried to frame my nephew for a drug charge he didn't commit. Jeremy was a good kid, honor roll student, wanted to be a teacher. But he saw something he shouldn't have seen, and they destroyed his life for it. The pain in her voice was familiar, the same anguish Marcus had heard from Thomas talking about Bella, from Mrs. Patterson talking about her grandson. All of them connected by loss, by the casual cruelty of people who saw other human beings as obstacles to be removed. Where is your nephew now? Marcus asked. Dead. The word fell between them like a stone. Overdose, they called it. Except Jeremy never used drugs in his life. That was 3 months ago. She turned to face Marcus, her expression fierce with contained rage. That's when I decided to stop playing by their rules. Judge Washington pulled up files on her computer, financial records, phone logs, surveillance photos that made Mrs. Patterson's evidence look elementary by comparison. You stumbled into the middle of a multi-million-dollar operation, Mr. Williams. Morrison's network doesn't just deal drugs. They launder money through local businesses, control city contracts, manipulate court cases. Your little diner was just one piece of a much larger puzzle. Marcus stared at the evidence spread before him. Why didn't you expose this when you were still on the bench? I tried. That's why I'm retired at 54 instead of serving until 70. Her laugh was bitter. Amazing how quickly sexual harassment allegations can surface when you start asking the wrong questions. Amazing how believable those allegations become when the accused is a black woman in a predominantly white judicial system. The parallels between their situations weren't lost on Marcus. Both of them had been destroyed professionally for trying to do the right thing. Both of them had been painted as the villains in stories where they were actually the heroes. But you kept fighting, Marcus said. I kept fighting because giving up means they win. And when they win, more Jeremys die. More Mrs. Pattersons get pushed downstairs. More good people like you get framed for crimes they didn't commit. She pulled up a new screen showing real-time police communications. Sarah Chun was released 20 minutes ago. Seems her lawyer, a friend of mine from law school, showed up with some very uncomfortable questions about the DEA agents who arrested her. Turns out Agent Walsh and Agent Rodriguez don't actually exist in any federal database. Relief flooded through Marcus so powerfully his knees nearly buckled. She's safe. For now. But Marcus, you need to understand, they're not going to stop. Morrison can't afford to let you walk away. You've seen too much, you know too much, and now you've cost them too much. Judge Washington's expression softened slightly. The question is, are you ready to finish this fight? Marcus thought about Sarah, probably scared and confused but free. About Mrs. Patterson, fighting for her life in intensive care. About Thomas Hartley, bearing witness even when it put him at risk. About his grandmother, who taught him that every choice echoed through the world in ways both seen and unseen. What do we need to do? Judge Washington smiled for the first time since he'd arrived. We're going to give Morrison exactly what he doesn't expect, a fair fight. I've been building a case for months, but I needed someone on the inside, someone who'd witnessed their operation firsthand. Your testimony, combined with Mrs. Patterson's photographs and Thomas's recording from tonight, might be enough to break through their wall of corruption. She pulled up another screen showing news websites from neighboring cities. I've been in contact with journalists in the state capitol, people who can't be bought or intimidated by local officials. If we can get this story to them with solid evidence, Morrison's political connections won't be able to protect him. But first, Marcus said, understanding dawning, we have to survive long enough to tell it. Exactly. Morrison knows you're out there somewhere, knows you're a threat. He'll be pulling every resource, calling in every favor, using every dirty trick in his arsenal to find you before you can expose him. As if summoned by their conversation, Judge Washington's phone rang. She glanced at the caller ID, and her expression went grim. It's Thomas Hartley. He's been trying to reach me for the past hour. She answered on speaker. Thomas's voice was strained but determined. Judge Washington, they found me at the hospital. Morrison's people. They deleted the video from my phone, but I was smart enough to upload it to the cloud first. The problem is, they know I have copies. Marcus felt his heart sink. Another ally in danger because of his choices. Where are you now, Thomas? Judge Washington asked. My apartment, but not for long. I can see them setting up surveillance outside. They think because I'm old and disabled, I can't fight back. There was steel in his voice now, the same tone Marcus had heard when he defended Marcus to Detective Morrison. They're wrong. Thomas, get out of there. Now. Come to the safe house. Negative. I've got a better idea. Thomas's voice carried a note of grim satisfaction. I still have friends from my unit, Judge. Men who understand what honor means, who know how to fight dirty when the situation calls for it. It's time to remind this town that some battles are worth fighting. Marcus felt something stir in his chest, not just hope, but recognition. He wasn't just a waiter who'd stumbled into a nightmare anymore. He was part of something bigger, connected to people who'd chosen courage over comfort, who decided that some principles were worth defending regardless of the personal cost. Judge Washington, he said, his voice stronger than it had been all day, what do you need me to do? She studied his face for a moment, seeing something there that satisfied her. I need you to be brave one more time. Tomorrow morning, we're going to walk into the lion's den and tell the truth, no matter who tries to stop us. When have you found unexpected allies in your darkest moments? Sometimes courage is contagious, and one person's brave choice inspires others to stand up too. Who has been your unexpected ally when you needed them most? As Judge Washington began outlining their plan for the final confrontation, Marcus felt his grandmother's presence like a warm hand on his shoulder. He thought about Sarah, free but still in danger. About Mrs. Patterson, unconscious but alive. About Thomas, old but not defeated. About all the battles fought by people who'd never expected to become heroes. Tomorrow would bring the final test, a chance to expose the corruption that had poisoned his community, to seek justice for everyone who'd been hurt, to prove that sometimes the light really could overcome the darkness. But tonight, for the first time since this nightmare began, Marcus Williams felt ready to face whatever came next. He wasn't alone anymore. He never had been. He just needed to find the courage to accept the help that had been offered all along. The turning point had arrived, and with it came the strength to fight back. The press conference was scheduled for 10 a.m. at the county courthouse steps. Judge Washington had arranged for 3 investigative journalists from major news outlets to attend, along with representatives from the state attorney general's office. Marcus stood in the bathroom mirror of the safe house, adjusting the tie Judge Washington had given him, trying to look like a man whose testimony could topple a criminal empire. "You ready for this?" Judge Washington asked, appearing in the doorway. She looked every inch the distinguished jurist in her navy suit, her evidence folder tucked under her arm like a weapon. "As ready as I'll ever be." Marcus straightened his shoulders. "Have you heard anything about Mrs. Patterson?" "Still critical, but stable. And Sarah is safe. I had my security detail pick her up this morning. She's waiting for us at the courthouse." Relief washed over Marcus. After everything that had gone wrong, the thought of seeing Sarah again, of having her there when he finally told the truth, gave him strength. They drove to the courthouse in Judge Washington's sedan, the morning sun bright and encouraging. Marcus could see the news vans already setting up, reporters checking their equipment. Thomas Hartley sat on a bench near the courthouse steps, his military bearing unmistakable even in civilian clothes. 2 other men flanked him, clearly veterans, clearly ready for trouble. "Looks like Thomas brought reinforcements," Judge Washington observed with satisfaction. As they parked, Marcus spotted Sarah near the courthouse entrance, talking to a woman in a business suit who was probably one of the journalists. She looked tired but determined, and when she saw Marcus approaching, her face lit up with relief and something deeper. "Marcus." She rushed to him, and for a moment he forgot about everything else as she threw her arms around him. "I was so scared. When they arrested me, when you ran." "I'm sorry," he whispered into her hair. "I'm sorry I left you. You did what you had to do. What we both knew was right." Judge Washington approached with her evidence folder, but before she could speak, Marcus noticed something that made his blood run cold. Detective Morrison was there, standing near the courthouse entrance with what looked like federal agents, real ones this time, judging by their bearing and credentials. "Judge Washington," Marcus said urgently, "Morrison's here." She followed his gaze and smiled, a cold, satisfied expression that made Marcus's stomach tighten with unease. Perfect timing. Before Marcus could ask what she meant, Judge Washington walked directly toward Morrison. To Marcus's horror, she extended her hand to the detective with obvious familiarity. "Ray," she said warmly. "Right on schedule." Morrison's answering smile was equally cold. "Angela. I have to admit, this one was your masterpiece." The world seemed to tilt sideways as Marcus watched his supposed ally, the woman who'd offered him hope, who'd promised to help him fight corruption, embrace his greatest enemy like an old friend. Sarah's hand found his arm. "Marcus, what's happening?" Judge Washington turned back to them, and her expression had changed completely. Gone was the warmth, the shared purpose, the righteous anger. In its place was something calculating and predatory. "I'm sorry, Mr. Williams," she said with mock sympathy. "But you were never the hero in this story. You were the patsy." Thomas started to rise from his bench, alarm clear on his weathered face, but the 2 men flanking him, who Marcus had assumed were veterans, revealed themselves to be Morrison's people, restraining the old soldier with practiced efficiency. "You see," Judge Washington continued, her voice carrying easily to the gathering reporters, "we needed someone to take the fall for a much larger operation. Someone sympathetic, someone whose persecution would generate outrage and distract from the real investigation happening behind the scenes. Marcus felt Sarah's grip tighten on his arm as the truth crashed over him. "You've been planning this since the beginning." "Since before the beginning, actually. We've been watching you for months, Mr. Williams. The perfect candidate, idealistic, principled, just noble enough to make people care when you fell." Judge Washington's smile was genuinely amused now. "Did you really think it was coincidence that Thomas brought his dying dog to that specific diner on that specific night? That Mrs. Patterson happened to have a camera ready? That Sarah Chun, a veterinarian, just happened to be there when you needed a medical expert?" Marcus looked at Sarah, desperate to see denial in her eyes, but what he found there was guilt and something that might have been pity. "Sarah." His voice was barely a whisper. "I'm sorry," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry, Marcus. They have my brother in immigration detention. They said they'd deport him if I didn't." The betrayal hit harder than any physical blow could have. Sarah, beautiful, brave Sarah, who'd risked her career to defend him, who'd been there for every step of his journey from victim to hero, had been acting on orders from the very people he'd thought they were fighting. "Mrs. Patterson?" he asked numbly. "A confused old woman who got in over her head," Morrison said dismissively. "Her evidence was real enough. We fed it to her slowly over months, let her think she was being clever. But it only shows part of the operation, the part we wanted exposed." Judge Washington opened her evidence folder, revealing not the corruption-fighting documents Marcus expected, but a completely different set of papers. "These are the real documents, Mr. Williams. Financial records showing that you've been receiving payments from drug dealers for months. Testimony from multiple witnesses who'll swear you were dealing out of the diner. Video evidence, heavily edited but quite convincing, showing you accepting money from known criminals." Marcus stared at the manufactured evidence of his own guilt, understanding finally that he'd never had a chance. From the moment he'd stood up for Thomas and Bella, he'd been walking into entraps so elaborate and well-planned that resistance had been impossible. "The beautiful thing," Morrison added, "is that your heroic story makes you the perfect scapegoat. The idealistic young man who got corrupted by easy money. The community will be outraged, demanding justice, completely distracted from the real network operating right under their noses." One of the journalists was already filming, capturing what looked like a dramatic confession scene. Marcus realized that even now, even as they revealed their manipulation, they were still using him. His shock and betrayal would play perfectly on camera as the guilt of a caught criminal. "But Sarah," Marcus started, "will testify that you seduced her into helping with your drug operation," Judge Washington finished. "Her cooperation in exchange for her brother's freedom and her own immunity from prosecution." Sarah's sobs were real, her anguish genuine, but it didn't matter. She would still destroy him to save her family, just as he would have done the same in her position. Thomas Hartley called out from where he was being restrained, "This is wrong. Marcus saved my dog. He's a good man." "A touching testimonial," Morrison said, "from a man suffering from PTSD and opioid addiction. His credibility is somewhat compromised." As the federal agents moved to arrest him, Marcus felt the final pieces of his world collapse. Mrs. Patterson, if she survived, would be dismissed as senile. Thomas would be discredited as mentally unstable. Sarah would testify against him to protect her brother. And the real criminals would continue poisoning his community while he rotted in federal prison. "You won't get away with this," Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. They already had gotten away with it. Judge Washington leaned close as the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. "Mr. Williams, we already have. But don't despair, your sacrifice serves a greater purpose. While everyone's focused on your trial, we'll be expanding our operation to 3 more states. Your grandmother would be so proud to know her lessons about helping others contributed to such a successful enterprise." The mockery of his grandmother's memory was the final cruelty. Marcus looked around at the faces surrounding him, reporters eager for their story, federal agents doing their jobs, Sarah weeping but still complicit in his destruction, Thomas fighting against his restraints but powerless to help. And somewhere in the distance, the real network of corruption stretched its tendrils deeper into the community Marcus had tried to protect, stronger than ever because his downfall would provide them with perfect cover. As they led him toward the federal courthouse for booking, Marcus caught one last glimpse of the morning sun. It looked different now, not warm and encouraging, but cold and distant, shining down on a world where heroes died and villains prospered, where doing the right thing was just another path to destruction. The war wasn't over. It had never really begun. Marcus Williams, the waiter who tried to save a dying dog and ended up losing everything, disappeared into the federal building as the cameras rolled and the real criminals smiled and planned their next move. Sometimes the system is so corrupt that individual heroism isn't enough. Marcus tried to fight, but he was outmatched from the beginning. What would you do if you discovered that everyone you trusted was part of the conspiracy against you? How do you fight back when the entire system is designed to destroy you? Marcus Williams sat in his orange jumpsuit, staring at the concrete wall of his cell, when the guard called his name for a visitor. In 6 months, he'd had exactly 3 visitors: a public defender who barely looked at his case, a reporter who wanted to write about the fall of a community hero, and Sarah once, to apologize through tears he no longer believed were real. So when the guard led him to the visitor's room and he saw Mrs. Eleanor Patterson sitting across from him, alive, alert, and very much not the confused old woman everyone believed her to be, Marcus thought he might be hallucinating. "Hello, dear," she said with that same gentle smile he remembered from the diner. "I imagine you have questions." Marcus sat down slowly, his mind reeling. "You're supposed to be in a coma. Brain damage from the fall." "Oh, I was never in a coma. That was just what the doctors were told to report." Mrs. Patterson's eyes were sharp, calculating, nothing like the frail elderly woman he remembered. Amazing what a little money in the right accounts can accomplish. "You're part of it too." It wasn't a question. Marcus felt the last of his faith in human nature crumble to dust. "You were working with them from the beginning." Mrs. Patterson tilted her head, studying him with something that might have been genuine affection. "Not with them, dear. Against them. But sometimes you have to let people think you're dead to really start living." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small device that looked like a hearing aid. "Recording device. I've been wearing it for 8 months, documenting every conversation, every meeting, every order from Morrison's network." Her smile turned predatory. "Including the one where Judge Washington and Detective Morrison planned your entire downfall." Marcus stared at the device, afraid to hope. "Why should I believe you? Everyone else has been lying to me." "Because, dear boy, I'm the only one who was never supposed to survive this. They tried to kill me, remember? Pushed me down those stairs, left me for dead. The only reason I'm alive is because I saw it coming and knew how to fall without breaking my neck." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "My grandson Tommy didn't die of leukemia, Marcus. He was murdered by Morrison's people because he stumbled onto their operation. I've been planning my revenge for 3 years, waiting for the right moment, the right catalyst. Me, Marcus said, understanding beginning to dawn. You. A genuinely good person who would do the right thing even when it cost him everything. Someone whose persecution would be so outrageous that it would force people to pay attention. Mrs. Patterson's eyes glittered with fierce intelligence. I needed them to think they'd won completely, needed them to get overconfident, to expand their operation just like Judge Washington promised they would. She pulled out a thick manila envelope. 3 states, Marcus. They've expanded to 3 states, just like she said. Which means they've now committed federal crimes across state lines. Which means the FBI, the real FBI, finally has jurisdiction to move against them. Marcus felt something stir in his chest that he'd thought was dead forever. You're saying? I'm saying that in approximately 6 hours, simultaneous raids will hit Morrison's network in 4 states. Judge Washington, Detective Morrison, District Attorney Brennan, and 43 other conspirators will be arrested on charges ranging from drug trafficking to murder to conspiracy to obstruct justice. The room seemed to spin around Marcus. The evidence against me. Fabricated, as you suspected. The real FBI has been building a case against the fabricators for months. Your conviction will be overturned, your record expunged, and you'll be eligible for compensation under the wrongful prosecution statute. Marcus sat in stunned silence, trying to process the magnitude of what she was telling him. Sarah. Mrs. Patterson's expression softened. Was genuinely coerced, genuinely terrified for her brother's safety. She's been working with the FBI for 4 months, providing information about the network's veterinary drug connections. Her testimony against you is part of her cover. She's been feeding them false information while gathering real evidence. She's been protecting me. She's been protecting all of us. That young woman loves you more than you know, Marcus. The hardest part of this whole operation was watching her suffer, knowing she couldn't tell you the truth. Marcus felt tears he hadn't allowed himself to shed in months burning behind his eyes. Thomas. Real veteran, Real service dog, real grief. But also a retired military intelligence officer who's been working with me since the beginning. His PTSD and drug addiction are as fictional as my dementia. The pieces were falling into place with dizzying speed. So when I stood up in the diner, you did exactly what we hoped you'd do, but for exactly the reasons we knew you'd do it. Your heroism was real, Marcus. Your choices were your own. We just provided the stage. Mrs. Patterson reached across the table and took his hand. I know it's hard to trust anyone after what you've been through, but in about 5 hours, you're going to walk out of here a free man. The question is, what are you going to do with your freedom? Marcus looked into her eyes that held the same fierce determination he'd seen in his grandmother's face, the same refusal to let evil triumph that had driven him to stand up in the diner that night. I'm going to help you finish this, he said. Mrs. Patterson smiled, and for the first time in months, Marcus saw genuine warmth in another person's expression. I was hoping you'd say that. Because taking down Morrison's network was just the beginning. There are other networks, other communities being poisoned by corruption. Other good people who need someone to stand up for them. She stood to leave, then paused. Oh, and Marcus? Your grandmother would be very proud. She raised a man who chose to do right even when it seemed like the whole world was against him. That's the rarest kind of courage. As the guard led Mrs. Patterson away, Marcus sat alone in the visitor's room, feeling something he hadn't experienced in 6 months, hope. Not just for his own freedom, but for the possibility that good people could still win, that justice could still triumph, that the light could still overcome the darkness. Outside the detention center, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. But Marcus knew that tomorrow would bring a new dawn, not just for him, but for everyone who'd been hurt by Morrison's network, everyone who'd been waiting for someone to stand up and fight back. The war wasn't over. It was just beginning. And this time, Marcus Williams knew exactly which side he was on. Justice delayed isn't always justice denied. Sometimes the good guys really do win, but only after they've proven they're willing to sacrifice everything for what's right. What battles are you willing to fight, even when victory seems impossible? Share your thoughts about never giving up the fight for what's right. Thank you so much for watching this story all the way to the end. If this touched your heart, then you're going to love the next one. It's just as powerful, and even more intriguing than you can imagine. So don't stop here. Click the video showing on your screen right now and continue the journey. I'll be waiting for you on the other side of that story. See you there.